Why would anyone willingly bring such a horrific and distasteful manga to English-speaking readers? Carlos Santos, Anime News Network. The number of stars this title truly deserves is right there in the title. 0. Them Anime Reviews. Apocalypse Zero is an anime that lives up to its name. 0 merits, 0 reasons to watch it, 0 out of 10. Kivo, my anime list. Apocalypse Zero has a reputation in Western anime circles for being one of the worst, one of the most foul, most offensive anime out there. Legendarily, this anime only lasted 2 episodes, and yet had enough filth and vials stuffed into it for a lifetime. The manga was pulled from English publication by Volume 6, because it was far too graphic to be released onto this world. My name is Duncan, and I'm here to tell you that Apocalypse Zero, or Kakugo no Susume, is not only good, but it might be one of the greatest stories of all time. Before we get started, I thought I would mention how this video came about. You see, my last upload, the one about the Amon OVA, was chosen via a YouTube and Twitter poll. The response to that video was overwhelmingly positive, so I thought I would try to make lightning strike twice again and launch another poll. Apocalypse Zero was head and shoulders above the rest. If I'm being honest, it's sometimes really a guessing game as to what's going to be a big hit on my channel. And so recently, doing polls has helped me gauge what you guys are interested in me talking about. So I am preemptively polling the next video topic right now as you're watching this video. Or at least I did if you're watching this video way later on. These are all topics that I've had in mind and I think I can do something interesting with, but I'm not entirely sure that there are people that want to see me talk about this particular thing. The next topics are the Mazin Kaiser series, Hades Project Zeomer, Japanese exclusive arcade games, and Japanese true crime movies. Whatever wins will be the next thing that I work on, but not necessarily the next thing that I release, if that makes any sense. And you can go vote for what I'll cover next right now on either my YouTube community page or my Twitter. Pause the video and go vote now, although I guess you don't really have to pause if you can multitask. I sort of already got your view, so from my point of view, it's whatever. And I don't really say this that often anymore, but if you want to sort of keep up to date, see my thoughts on whatever current thing I'm either reading or watching, please consider following either my Letterboxd or Twitter, or both of them. Anyways, that's more shilling than I've done in a single year, so let's get to the video. Kakugo no Susume, also known by its English title Apocalypse Zero, is a manga by Yamaguchi Takayuki. He is possibly more well known as the author of Shigurui, a violent samurai manga that was adapted into an anime series by Madhouse in 2007. Kakugo no Susume is an earlier work that actually stems from a 1-volume prototype manga called Heisei Buso Seigidan in 1992. 2 years later, that story would be reworked into Kakugo no Susume, and it would run for exactly 100 chapters in Weekly Shonen Champion. This would make it Yamaguchi's first long-running manga, and just after it finished publication, it was adapted into a 2-episode OVA, directed by Toshiki Hirano. But more on him in a bit. The OVA hit America through Media Blasters in 2001. Actually, exactly September 11th, 2001. What the Released under the catchier name Apocalypse Zero, it would quickly gain notoriety as one of the worst anime in existence. That infamy would eventually lead the manga to be published in English, from 2005 to 2006. At the time, only 6 of the 11 volumes had been translated. We are going to talk about the anime first. mainly because for the longest time this was my, and many others, only exposure to the series. It also adapts the first 3 volumes of the manga pretty faithfully, so if we're going to talk about the story, we might as well start here. Once again, it's the post-apocalypse. This time, it's caused by shifts in the Earth's crust that created devastating earthquakes, leaving society in shambles. Remnants of civilization still exist, one such being Gakuji High School. However, it might not stay that way for long. The school is under attack by creatures known as tactical fiends, controlled by the villainous Lord Harada and her collection of ghoulish generals. But standing between Harada and her total domination of the world is one man, Harada's brother, and the owner of the fortified armor shell Zero, Kakugo Harakude. With Zero in hand, Kakugo resolves himself to not just defend humanity, but to put an end to his evil sibling's reign once and for all. Apocalypse Zero was directed by Toshiki Hirano, a legend in the 80s and 90s OVA boom. Hirano is probably best known for writing, directing, and doing character designs on Fight Ixer 1. He would later fill out his directing portfolio with hits like Hades Project Zeomer and Vampire Princess Miu. Apocalypse Zero was released in 1996, at a point when Hirano was at the top of his game in the OVA business. Our 2 lead and opposing siblings each had an incredibly prolific voice actor attached to them. Kakugo is voiced by Yamadera Koichi, who has been in basically everything ever animated in Japan, including, but not limited to, Spike Spiegel from Cowboy Bebop, Togusa from Ghost in the Shell, Kaji from Evangelion, Cheese from Anpan Man. Playing opposite him is Ogata Megumi as Harada. Ogata has had a similarly packed filmography, with roles including, but not limited to, Yukito from Cardcaptor Sakura, Kurama from Yu Yu Hakusho, Shinji from Evangelion, and a million other things. Nagito from Danganronpa. Now, talking about Apocalypse Zero comes with several distinct challenges, the very first of which is the name. The original Japanese title, Kakugo no Susume, is a pun on a Japanese collection of pamphlets in the late 1800s called Gakumon no Susume, or an encouragement of learning. In addition to being the name of the main character, Kakugo also means to resolve oneself. It can be used sometimes to refer to you preparing yourself for something. I'm pretty sure the first time that I heard this word was in Puyo Puyo Tetris 2. So the title can be literally translated as an encouragement of resolution, but that doesn't mean anything to anyone and it sounds bad. The title, Apocalypse Zero, was likely chosen by media blasters to get across 2 things. This is a post-apocalyptic show, and there's a guy called Zero in it. And as far as I know, there aren't really any direct references to an encouragement of learning in Apocalypse Zero, but I think the Japanese title weirdly does fit the tone of the series. For starters, it's a word pun, so it already signals to the audience, hey, this isn't too serious, so don't worry. Apocalypse Zero, when put next to titles like Violence Jack or Genocyber, doesn't really indicate that the show is more campy and comedic than either of those. The second reason why the Japanese title kind of feels right is the main character Kakugo. He's an extremely determined and serious young lad. Unlike many other anime protags, he never wavers or veers off course of his main objective. He's completely uptight and serious for the whole time, and that isn't even a bad thing. So in a strange way, making your title a obtuse reference to an ancient academic paper, and then having your main character be a super serious, studious student sort of fits the tone. But also, Apocalypse Zero is just a pretty badass name, so I really can't blame them for going with that. And for the sake of this video, I'm probably going to refer to the OVA more as Apocalypse Zero and the manga as Kakugo no Susume. I'll probably just be using these terms interchangeably. Now, the actual really big problem with Apocalypse Zero is the contents of Apocalypse Zero, which I would have said was impossible to show on YouTube if it weren't for some people just uploading the entire thing uncensored and uncut. But still, I don't want to take the risk of showing anything like nipples, dicks, bush, balls, or anything like that on this channel. Now, this is very unfortunate because all of the enemies are grotesque abominations called tactical fiends. Well, actually, they're called tactical devils or tactical demons, but I kind of prefer the translation that the manga went for. And every single one of them has some part of their genital anatomy twisted and enlarged and sometimes just used as a weapon. They are essentially more adult versions of a monster of the week that you would find in your typical Sentai or Kamen Rider show, which is all too appropriate because Apocalypse Zero is clearly influenced by Kamen Rider. The fortified armor that Kakugo punches his suitcase to transform into looks like a midway point between Jinro and Kamen Rider Black. Considering that the main character is in black armor, Harada is often shown in white, and it just feels like Black Sun and Shadow Moon all over again. But that's not a bad thing, and it's absolutely why I dug this show very early on. The Zero Suit is also embodied by the collective will of thousands of dead souls that died unjustly. So it has its own thoughts and feelings separate from Kakugo, and can even talk to him directly. Not that any of this is really even spelled out in the first episode. It's just sort of thrown at the audience in a way that might be off-putting for a lot of viewers. But the second episode opens with a flashback, showing Kakugo and Harada receiving their respective suits from their father. While Kakugo would merge successfully with Zero and fight on the side of justice, Harada's experience was much different. Now is as good a time as any, so let's talk about Harada. Now, you might notice that in all the flashbacks, Harada is drawn androgynously, but in present day, Harada is absolutely a woman. That's because, unlike Kakugo, when Harada merged with his suit, it ended up transforming him into a woman. Now, there's a bit more here going on than forcing someone to transition, but throughout the series, Harada actually seems more than pleased to be made into a woman. So I'm sticking to using female pronouns, even though Kakugo still refers to Harada as male and his brother. Maybe Kakugo was the real villain all along. But I think the idea is less a commentary on trans people and more about a character surpassing human concepts of gender and sexuality. It's less a transition from man to woman and more a transition from humanity to godhood. Does it lean into these stereotypes of villainous trans characters? Maybe. But is Harada an icon that we stan on this channel? Absolutely. Getting back to the OVA, it's worth mentioning that the animation is pretty good, though it's dying for a newer HD release. The cartoony style and character designs lend itself well to the OVA's action sequences. It's almost like a post-apocalyptic Looney Tunes at some points. Putting this onto Blu-ray would dramatically increase its reception. But the biggest knock against the OVA is just that it's an incomplete story. It only covers one section of a manga that's only just starting to find its footing. According to both the English and Japanese Wikipedia pages, this was supposed to be a 10-episode series, though why it was cancelled, or if it was ever actually intended to be 10 episodes, is completely unknown. There's plenty of OVAs that are just pilot episodes or sales pitches for longer adaptations of things. And that's sort of what Apocalypse Zero always felt like to me. Not to mention, the only word about this being intended to be 10 episodes comes from a Wikipedia edit that's just a few years old, which has me scratching my head as to why we've never heard about this sooner. If you watched Apocalypse Zero and were left wanting more, don't worry, because there is a full 9.5 volumes of unadapted material that we are about to dive right into. But before we talk about the manga, let's jump ahead and talk about the most underappreciated adaptation of Kakugo no Susume, the PlayStation 1 game. For whatever reason, in 1997, 1 year after both the manga and OVA had finished, Kakugo no Susume, the 3D fighter, was released onto this world. And I know my goal here is to defend the series, to reappraise it, but I can't defend this one. It just sorta stinks. The game was never translated into English, and I doubt it ever will be. And given that the tactical fiends from the OVA are, well, impossible to put into a fighting game for multiple reasons, the roster is mostly pulled from the manga. Characters here do look janky, but at least there's some novelty in seeing them rendered in 3D like this. So if you want to recreate your favorite manga fights, or maybe make up whole new ones, this certainly is a way. The game is a cakewalk, and that's coming from somebody who is famously terrible at fighting games. The story mode is a roster of characters to fight through with no variation except that each character has a different line of dialogue before they fight. And it is the exact same fights in the exact same order for each character. My first run through took me exactly 12 minutes, and by 38 minutes I had beaten the story mode with 3 different characters. It's basically Kusoge, and at best it feels like a half-finished game. So for now, let's move on and get back to the main story of Kakugo no Susume. The manga continues on after the anime's end, and mostly sticks to a lot of tactical fiends of the week running around and wreaking havoc before Kakugo dons the Zero suit and quickly dispenses them. And this is totally fine. In comparison to an already exaggerated art style in the anime, the manga is even more cartoony. Characters have these doughy proportions and big round eyes that really signals to the reader that this isn't exactly the most serious manga. It's not exactly a gag manga at this point, unless the gag is body horror, but it's definitely in the camp zone. At times, the tactical fiends end up looking like something straight out of Garbage Pail Kids, especially given how exaggerated their proportions are. In fact, the entire manga feels pretty in line with the underground comic scene, almost carrying with it an air of anti-authority, a rebellious spirit. Eventually though, a character named Rai goes out to fight Kakugo, and here's where we start to see our first shift. While still drawing on that exaggerated human anatomy, Rai is way closer in build to the Zero suit than the tactical fiends thus far. He's also the first real opponent that the audience is supposed to take seriously, and the first to give Kakugo and Zero a real challenge. And the aftermath of the fight is what leads Kakugo to go on the offensive. Instead of waiting for Harada's tactical fiends to reach him, Kakugo decides to plunge headfirst into enemy territory on his own. And I think it was around this point that I really felt the similarities to Fist of the North Star. The comparisons are unavoidable. Both are, of course, violent post-apocalyptic manga with a martial arts edge. The steel balls that are embedded in Kakugo's skin even sort of arrange themselves to look like Kenshiro's scars. But the start of this arc really began to remind me of Kenshiro and Shin, especially after Kakugo's main love interest is kidnapped. Plus, Kenshiro is no stranger to sibling rivalry throughout his series. But there actually might be a deeper reason why there's so many similarities. Yamaguchi actually went through Lone Wolf and Cub creator Kazuo Koike's Gekiga Sonjuku, a college course for up-and-coming manga creators. Fellow Gekiga Sonjuku alumni include Rumiko Takahashi and, of course, Tetsuo Hara of North Star fame. And I think it's partially because of this that Kakugo no Susume is deliberately subverting certain aspects of Fist of the North Star. Compared to Kenshiro, Kakugo is drawn very effeminately. He's basically like a twink version of Kenshiro. Physically, he has a lot more in common with famous twink Yukio Mishima than he actually has with any of the North Star cast. And yet, he's still every bit as deadly. He's not compromising effeminate features for his more masculine traits. Shortly after Kakugo begins his direct attack on Harada's forces, the manga makes one of its biggest turns. A guy that looks like he's ripped straight out of Phantom of the Paradise turns Kakugo's girlfriend, Horie, into a tactical fiend. Don't worry, that's the setup, not the twist. As Kakugo fights her, Horie shoots a laser beam that instantly makes the 3,000 souls inside of Zero reach Nirvana and evaporate into the afterlife. Kakugo is now forced to fight on his own without the help of the coolest power suit that you could ever have. And while he does end up saving Horie pretty quickly, he stays separated from Zero. Now he has to fight off Harada's fiends while also being at a complete disadvantage for the first time. And to me, this is where the manga actually started to get really good. It was beginning to change from a violent but standard action manga into something greater. Appropriately, this is where Kakugo undergoes several bodily transformations, some that last for pages at most. What would be the new default super mode for any other character in any other manga is liberally given to Kakugo and then tossed aside without a second glance. It's clear that Yamaguchi is more concerned with the limits that he can twist the human body into rather than a glorified power-up. In fact, the style and content of the manga isn't too dissimilar from Edo Gudo nonsense. You could almost make a case that Kakugo no Susume is the only instance of an Edo Gudo action manga. Characters are lovingly drawn, disemboweling themselves and others around them. Everyone in general has much softer and rounder proportions than what you would be used to in a straight action manga, let alone a violent one. This is especially true of our main love interest Horie, who Yamaguchi describes as being built like a Jeep. I'll let you guys draw your own conclusions on that. Kakugo continues his path of destruction as he reaches Harada's castle, and after an extremely destructive fight with a big guy named Bolt, he does make his way in. This fight is incredible, but it is a mere footnote in the manga. That is how insane this whole story is. What would be the best fight in any other series is relegated to a mere footnote here. My personal favorite fight has to be the one with Blob, because it feels like something straight out of a Souls game. This little creature dude comes up to Kakugo, realizes that he's completely outmatched, and commits seppuku out of shame. And upon his death, he transforms into a gigantic fire centipede that ends up being one of the most formidable foes that Kakugo has faced thus far. And while he does overcome Blob as usual, Blob's energy is imparted into Harada, who quickly deems herself Fire Harada, an upgrade that is almost completely meaningless because we haven't seen Harada actually fight anyone directly at this point. This is my favorite fight in the manga, and it is followed up by a 2-volume-long flashback fight between Harada and her father that could be also just as deserving of best fight in the series. It's an operatic duel in the snow that the audience had only seen just hinted at so far. The OVA briefly touches on this fight, but it could have easily been a whole episode of the anime. And it's only after this, in Volume 9, that Kakugo finally reunites with the 3,000 souls that inhabit Zero, and once again, dons the Zero suit for the first time since Volume 4. What follows is the final battle between Kakugo and Harada, sibling against sibling, a battle on a worldly scale that somehow feels up close and personal. Each chapter in this climactic saga ends with a page of comments from fans. Some of them share fan-made plushes and goods, others just words of praise in general, or comments about their favorite character. And it really makes you feel like you're reading something big. An epic battle that had been building for the past 9 volumes that was finally coming to an end. And all appropriately, this fits with the actual theme of Kakugo no Susume. Throughout the whole story, Kakugo has managed to overcome adversity at his highest and lowest. No matter how hard it seems, even in the barren post-apocalyptic wastelands, he resolves himself to move forward and urges the reader to do the same. Kakugo no Susume is ultimately about the triumph of the human will to take on any obstacle, to transform itself in new and sometimes horrifying ways just to take on the next challenge. The manga is a very pro-human manga, in a way that few others can be. Its ending is so incredibly gripping that it just sort of makes you happy to be alive afterwards. And you can feel that through Yamaguchi's art, through the cheering letters of fans, and even in Hirano's anime to some degree. It was so well liked, in fact, that by the time it wrapped up publication, it was a finalist for the Tezuka Osamu Cultural Prize. In the West, people watched Apocalypse Zero, and the overwhelming majority hated it. But there were a few that loved it. Those few might have gone out and bought the official English release of the manga, only for publication to stop just as the story picks up steam. Through hard work and dedication of not just one, not just two, but 3 different fan translator groups, Kakugo no Susume was finally fully translated into English just 2 years before this video was released. This story and these characters clearly struck a chord deep in some people, and you can still feel that influence today. Ishimaru from Danganronpa bears more than a passing resemblance to Kakugo, and I'm not even sure that Kill la Kill would exist today if it weren't in part for Kakugo no Susume. From the beginning, I resolved myself to fight an uphill battle to convince you that Apocalypse Zero, Kakugo no Susume, isn't just good, it's actually an incredible achievement for Yamaguchi Takayuki. The OVA has been lauded as one of the worst anime. The manga has been called horrific and distasteful. But now, seeing how much influence it's had, seeing how much blood, guts, and sweat went into the series, seeing how much people responded to it positively, is it really fair to label it like that? I don't think so. In fact, I think there's way worse anime out there, both in terms of shocking content and just overall quality. And now that I've finished the manga, I know that I'm going to go up to bat for it whenever I can. Even Yamaguchi himself can't seem to let go of the series, penning a reworking of it in his 2010 manga, Exo Skull Zero. If even a small bit of this looked or sounded interesting, I urge you to go out and read the manga now that the translation is finished. And if you enjoyed the OVA but haven't read the manga, you should absolutely go and see the story through to its end. Despite the OVA's reception and the manga's cancellation, Kakugo no Susume has carved out a small cult following. And I hope that one day, through the resolve of its fans, the series might not be remembered as the worst anime of all time, but as one of the greatest manga ever written.